I'm so excited to have a guest today that is going to go deep with the sky and entertainment. We have an astronomer in the house, Larme Abron. How are you today?
I'm very well. I'm excited to be here after all the time we've spoken about doing this and spoken online about Instagram. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh my God, thank you for being here. I know we met during a extravagant night when we were looking at the sky, and there's a lot of stuff happening in the sky this week. So thank you again for being here. We can jump into your astronomy, your entertainment background, your photography.
Yeah, awesome.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Prepare for takeoff.
You're now listening to Stepner Show.
What's happening in the sky right now? What do we have to look forward to?
Okay, cool. So there's a lot of stuff happening in the sky these days. There's always a lot of stuff happening, to be fair. We forget that the stars aren't static. Not only is the Earth moving, but everything else is moving. But certainly there is an eclipse. We met, I think, when I was going up to shoot an eclipse at Griffith Observatory, which is when we met on the way there. So mutual passion there.
Yes.
And there's another lunar eclipse that's going to be happening this Sunday, the 15th of May, which is very exciting. Also because it's going to be at a time when, it's a prime time, I think, so to speak, in English. So it's going to be at a time where it's visible for a lot of people in LA and on the West Coast at a reasonable time.
Right, because usually eclipses are like 2 in the morning to 5 a.m.
Yeah, it's the number of them that I've shot at. In fact, I feel like I shot one last year. Eclipses come in pairs. And so you will get a lunar will almost always precede or follow a solar eclipse, because the way that the moon has to be on its inclination, basically the way it moves means that the moon will take 28 days a month to, go around. And so we're going to get one at one end and one at the other. And so last year I finally, so eclipse chasers are called umbrophiles. I think umbrophiles.
Nice.
Usually it's for solar eclipse chasers, but it also works for lunar eclipse because you're chasing the umbra, so the shadow, for example, of the moon on the Earth during a solar eclipse. And so, so last year I did a umbrophile milestone, which is I shot a pair. So I shot the lunar here in LA, and I shot the solar in Iceland. It was partial where I was, but, and I shot the lunar, just in the street, and there were coyotes. And there was at one point, there was a coyote I don't think he even heard me. He didn't realize I was there, and he was just literally in between my tripod and me. It was pretty big. And, not being from the US, I'm never quite sure, coyotes seem fairly chill, but if you're not a small dog or a cat, so I feel like, but I don't want to provoke them. So and it was like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I was out there at, with a tripod shooting it, and I was like, maybe if I don't make any noise, the coyote, should I scare him or should I be quiet? And the coyote honestly was there for about 3 minutes, and I think maybe he heard my camera shutter at one point. But yeah, so it's nice to not be shooting it with the coyotes this year.
Oh my goodness, that must be exhilarating and just, thrilling at the same time to have a mountain wolf in between your sticks.
But that's what it also, eclipses in a way, that's what, we humans have observed eclipses for a long time. We didn't always know what they were, right?
Right.
But there's a connection to nature and, I think astronomy and most of the natural sciences, I think people forget. They see science people and they see us as kind of like these cold kind of people who are very Cartesian about things and who are very organized about stuff. And that's not really, I think, what a lot of people in science are. I don't know if you've met other people in science, but I think all of us are very interested in the natural world. And, the study of science as it begun was about the investigation of the natural world.
That's really well put. The closest thing I have to science is doctors.
Yeah,
right?
Same thing. Investigation of the human body.
Exactly.
The order of things, the natural world. There's certainly a lot of people in astronomy and astrophysics. I'd say we kind of collect very esoteric people. we have people who are, we have a lot of kooky people in our midst, which I think is awesome. Lots of famous astronomers were musicians as well and painters. Brian May, guitarist from Queen.
Oh, that's right.
He has a PhD in astrophysics.
That's right. And I'm sure that's probably why he's so good at guitar. It's like
it's nice to have multiple multiple skills. But again, people forget that science is super creative.
Absolutely. And speaking of creativity, this is why I do the podcast, because I like to speak to people about how we balance a well-examined life using creativity. A lot of people don't feel they're creative because they only look at paintings or art. But I feel like, somebody who's an entrepreneur can be very creative, or someone in a different field can be very creative. So I'm going to guess you are one of the few people that did not fall for the April Fool's joke of the Auroras being, the Northern Lights coming to California on April Fool's.
Oh man, I did see that. I think someone was telling me though the Northern Lights were visible in Nevada recently. Very lightly. I have not looked up the pictures. I actually check every morning. I check spaceweather.com. Great website.
Wow, I've never heard of that website.
It tells you a lot about what's happening in our skies, and in kind of more niche things. So you and I spoke about, and I post a lot these days about sunspots.
Yes, let's get into sunspots. What is a sunspot?
Yeah, so a sunspot is basically, if you ever see pictures of the sun, sometimes you might see, literally it looks like a little speck on the sun, a little dark spot on the sun, right? Now those are regions where the sun's magnetic field is so strong that it basically stops the gas and the plasma and all of that from coming up, and it's kind of inhibiting convection. And so it's basically creating a zone that's cooler, and that's why it's darker, right? But if you actually saw it without the rest of the sun, it would be as bright as the full moon. And, sunspots have been observed for thousands of years. We have records from ancient China where we don't know how people saw them because they didn't have telescopes.
Right, and can't you go blind if you look directly into the sun? Yes,
definitely, do not look at the sun. People listening to this, you do not try to find sunspots by looking at the sun. I know it's obvious, but I feel like we do need to tell people because it's,
So what's the safest way we can look at sunspots?
So the safest, you can go to a star party. So some star parties will, occur a little bit before sunset, and so you'll get a chance to see them. You can go on spaceweather.com and see them. Eclipse glasses, what I do is I have a Mylar filter that I use on top of a long lens, of a tele lens, and I shoot them most days like that. Again, that's something that, you're not going to see them. They're usually too small. You're not going to see them with eclipse glasses. So you do need some form of little telescope. But yeah, you can go online on spaceweather.com. And, what's been exciting is that so the sun has cycles that are about 9 to 14 years, right? And those are cycles of increasing and decreasing magnetic activity, right? So the sun's got magnetic field lines. Part of the reason sunspots happen is that the sun's magnetic fields get kind of twisted, and it's like a little kink. And so, we've had these cycles, and we've been, recording them and recording the amount of sunspots for a long time. And the previous cycle was actually the quietest since records began. So cycle 24 was really quiet, hardly any sunspot. I've been shooting sunspots for 13 years now, and it was super lame. The past decade, we didn't have a lot of sunspots. We had a very big one a couple years ago, but not a lot of good sunspots, and so now we're finally really getting good sunspots. So now is a great time to observe, and hopefully it'll lead to good northern lights. So sunspots are not the only cause, but they are correlated also with getting good displays of northern or southern lights.
And that has nothing to do with sun flares?
A lot of the sunspots emit flares, and so those will basically kind of interact with our magnetosphere, so our magnetic field lines on Earth, and they will basically create a kind of snapback reconnection, and that trickles down to our magnetic poles, and that will cause the northern lights. I think it was 1st and 2nd of September 1859, there was a massive sunspot, huge, and it led to something called the Carrington event, which is that it emitted such huge flares that people actually saw the northern lights as far down as Mexico.
Oh my goodness.
People could read at nighttime, miners were woken up by these lights in the sky. But that's a rare event that only occurs, every, I think it's 200 years or so.
Oh my goodness, that's way beyond our lifespan.
Well, but again, could happen now.
Exactly.
Could happen, so sunspots are an exciting thing that's happening right now, and it'll peak in 2025. So what's called the solar maximum which is when we'll get probably the most number of sunspots per predictions, is going to be about 2025. So if people can get to observatories, star parties, even getting a little Mylar filter on the telelens. And one good way to photograph them is often at sunsets. So we think people back then, they saw them through fog at sunset, for example. The first one I caught was by accident. I was actually visiting the US and I was in San Diego and I took a picture of the sunset. And I was like, is that dust on? And when you see it over multiple exposures, you're like, oh, that's not dust. And then I tracked it down, and it was two sunspots, two really big sunspots.
Oh my
Obviously,
goodness.
just don't look in the viewfinder.
Right.
So when you're shooting the sunset, don't look in the viewfinder. And sometimes, when we have big ones.
But you can look at the actual little monitor, right?
Yeah, you can look at your monitor.
Right.
But you can go online on space weather every single day. It's updated. It shows you in great detail. The Solar Dynamics Observatory is also a good website that'll show you the sun at all different wavelengths.
Oh, wow.
So like different lights we observe, like X-ray emissions and UV, and that tells us different things about the sun.
A few months, last year, the big conjunction between Jupiter and Saturn was a big thing. And that was a big craze amongst a lot of people. I could not even find a telescope.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah, I went to a telescope shop. They were completely sold out.
I guess during COVID also, I wonder if, I don't know, did people take an interest around you in astronomy and just looking up? There was a comet in 2020. There was a very visible comet in 2020. But that's great. I hope telescopes run out.
Yes,
I want people to be looking up at the sky.
Exactly. I'm more of a moon gazer. I definitely love the moon, but I have traveled across the country to see a solar eclipse.
That's amazing.
And I'm looking forward to this one. And you said it was at prime time. What time would that be?
Yeah, so this lunar eclipse will have its totality for LA time. It's going to be, so the totality is what we call when it's basically totally red, right? It's going to be right in the center of this kind of the Earth's shadow. That's going to be around 9 p.m. LA time. It'll start basically at sunset, moonrise. So I think it's about 8:20 that we're going to start seeing the reddening. A really cool thing that happens that not a lot of people know about during a lunar eclipse is sometimes you get a blue band. So most people are used to that red kind of phase.
Right.
And that's because, basically all the light from the sun is basically focused and passes through Earth's atmosphere. So you're basically seeing, sunrises, sunsets on the moon, the reflection of that light. And you get a little bit, and that's, it's refraction basically. And you also get a little bit of blue. So sometimes you get this kind of blue band that you can capture that's just on the edge of the red. So as you kind of see the red and the shadow progress across the moon, you might occasionally see a blue band. And that's just a little bit of blue that's still filtering through because all those colors are kind of filtering. So that's something I look forward to, is the blue band, because it looks beautiful. Obviously, you need to push your saturation a little bit and stuff to really get a great shot of it.
Where's the best place to see this eclipse here in LA?
Just literally step outside. Obviously it's always great to be up, a little bit higher. That's why people go to Griffith Observatory, I think. They like to have a nice vista. I need to see how, I can't remember how low the moon will be rising. So it may be worth being up a little bit on a hill just to kind of get that moonrise also. So for that one, it does pay to be a little bit elevated. But, again, you can, at some point, I think probably at 9 or so p.m., it should be high enough in the sky that most people should, have a good eye line to it.
Oh, that's amazing.
Which, again, and kids, I hope kids get to see it because they're always in the middle of the night, like we were saying. So for once, I hope a lot of kids get to see it.
And let's take it back. Yeah. When you were a kid, how were you exposed to astronomy? And how did you fall in love with this science?
It was actually, I feel, a big part of it was visiting the U.S. As a kid, I would visit the East Coast during the summertime. And, sure, there was certainly an aspect of sci-fi. I loved sci-fi. I would see, but certainly when I would visit the U.S., I saw Carl Sagan, and I would see Cosmos on TV. And I took out some of his books from the public library. And I remember just seeing all those pictures from Hubble and things like that, and thinking like, wow, that was certainly like, yeah, hearing, Carl Sagan and seeing all those images from the Hubble Space Telescope, I guess that was my gateway drug, kind of. And then there were multiple things over time. And the US has such an amazing space culture, I think. It really, like, we have the European Space Agency in Europe, which is equivalent to NASA, but I feel that the US is so passionate about this stuff, and people here, everything to do with the space program. It's part of US history, and it's a big part of, like, the legacy of science and technology. And that's something that we, in France, we don't have as much, I think, kind of like, just like this great dream-like. It's associated to the American dream, I suppose, in the US, right?
Right, especially like taking it back to the space race against Russia. And
yeah. People who came here to work on the space programs, for example. There's a good show about this called For All Mankind where they did a little bit of a twist. I don't know if you've seen it.
I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, you should watch it. It's really good. And they did a little bit of a twist, which is, what if Russia got to the moon first?
Oh, that's right. Right.
So you certainly, yeah, obviously part of it was tied to national policy and the Cold War and all sorts of things. But yeah, visiting the US, that triggered my enthusiasm. And then it's funny because a lot of people don't know this. I grew up reading, we had Sailor Moon. When I was in the 90s, we had Sailor Moon in France. I think most people are aware of what it is. It's an anime. It's like an anime from Japan with like superhero girls, right? They're all like Sailor Moon, Sailor Mars, Sailor Mercury. And I would read the manga, and a lot of it had references to astronomy and astrophysics. There's like the cosmological constant in one of them. I learned the names of the moons of Mars when I was very little because they were the names of characters associated to Sailor Mars.
Wow.
And that is something that I think we need more of, is, also because I was a little girl and that spoke to me.
So you were learning about astronomy through arts and sciences.
Yeah.
That is amazing.
It was kind of those both aspects joined together. And then when I became a teenager, of course, like I took, I'm sure we had astronomy courses in school, which I remember I shoplifted an astronomy book from from my school library. I stole a Carl Sagan book. I'm still sorry for the admission, but yeah. And so I was like, this is so interesting. I remember I would like take out something like Astronomy Weekly. And then when I, after high school, I started going to a lot of conferences. A lot of this stuff is open to the public. Wow. Even back then, you could go to conferences at like science museums or things like that. And so I, went to conferences, progressively found out that one of the places I was going to conferences had a program and I could study. And so it was like, but there was no representation of women in astronomy. And that was something I regretted deeply, because I didn't go back to studying astronomy and astrophysics until my late 20s. And I wish I had done it before, but I didn't see any women represented. I kind of thought, especially coming from France, to me, it was just like really stuffy old men who were all like, very serious and just doing calculations. And that's what I was telling you, like this idea that we have of science, right? As opposed to just like adventure and investigation of the natural world and all of that. Everyone I know in science is super interesting and super cultured and is into art and not everyone. There are some boring,
but when you describe it that
people.
way, very like, science sounds boring, but when I'm talking to you, it's like, science is like not boring.
But a lot of people don't, like I work as a science communicator, so I get to talk about science. A lot of my friends, I think they do in super interesting stuff. One of my friends, she does research on, rare illnesses that affect young babies. And it's like, I get that she's busy doing research, so she's not really there to be on Instagram or Facebook and tell people like, here's what we do in the lab. Here's how this works. Here's how research to create a drug to help, millions of people work. And we don't necessarily have, obviously, people who are doing research don't always have the time to do that.
Right.
It is an enormous amount of time to do outreach. And it's just kind of, I think, shrouded in mystery, the world of science. People don't really know, how was the vaccine developed against COVID? I understand people are afraid sometimes. They don't know anything about how this works.
Right, but then again, when you look at people's diets, like there's a science there that is like, hey, people are not really looking at the science of what they put into their body just in the food.
Sure, but again, how can you do that when you don't have an education system or a work environment? Again, coming from France, I had really regimented meals from a very young age in school, where we have 5-course meals in French cafeterias, where you have a little salad as a starter, you have a piece of bread and a piece of cheese, you have a little thing of fruit for dessert, you have, your main is going to be like a piece of meat with green beans and mashed potatoes, and you're going to have a super balanced meal. So obviously food is our thing in France, right? So you carry that into adulthood, but I can see how here also people don't have the time to eat. When you get a half-hour lunch break at work, how are you going to take the time to make a healthy meal? And then you're working crazy hours from 8 in the morning until 6 p.m., or you're working a night shift. You come home, you're exhausted. The last thing you're going to want to do is to let me make sure I'm getting my 5 fruit and vegetables per day, right?
Exactly.
So there is that aspect that obviously we as a society have, are leaning away from prioritizing our health and physical well-being through eating well and eating consciously and eating in a responsible manner for the planet and things like that. But there's also just that whether it's late-stage capitalism or the kind of degradation of work environments that I think people are starting to be wise to and are starting to refuse, has led to people simply not having the time to do basic things like feeding yourself correctly, which is tragic.
The thing about growing up in Mexico is that it mirrors a lot of the culture in France. We have a lot 2-hour lunches.
Yeah, that's right.
We clock out when we're supposed to. We work to live and not live to work.
Yeah, that's what we always say.
I've always been drawn to French culture. You okay there with her?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Okay, great.
She's very loving. I'm so much more used to cats. So dogs, sometimes I don't know what to do with them because I didn't grow up with dogs or anything. And
Lola.
I was like...
Sit, Mama, please. Sit.
She wants the spotlight.
Yeah, she does. Oh, my gosh. I want to get into your love of photography and how you got into being a photographer.
I don't work fully as a photographer anymore. I did in my 20s. I worked for some magazines in Europe. I worked for press. I was lucky. My dad is a professional photographer and, was my entire life. He worked for a lot of political figures in France. He was the photographer for the Mairie de Paris, so the Paris City Hall, basically.
Wow.
Under Jacques Chirac, so one of our presidents. So it was kind of cool as a kid. I got dragged to when France won the World Cup in '98, he was covering this party that they had at the Lido, this venue with dancers and feathers and everything. So they had a party there. So I got to go with him when France won the World Cup in '98. I got to cut class and take helicopter rides because he did a lot of aerial photography.
Oh, wow.
And he did a lot of stuff in the U.S. also connected to NASA, connected to obviously the space race and everything. He was working with a friend of his who was connected to, I don't know who he worked for exactly. I guess they worked for the major French news agencies in part, and they were covering a lot of space shuttle launches and things like that. So he gifted me a lot of his archive this Christmas, which was cool. So I didn't really have a choice but to get into photography because it's when I was little, I always had, my dad gave me this camera, and so I always had a camera at school. I have selfies from, more than 20 years ago, 25 years ago that I had my camera and I would take a selfie as a teenager or something.
With a camera, not a phone.
Yeah, like a proper camera. There was no camera phones at the time.
Yes.
So I was lucky that I grew up with my dad being a photographer and very good photographer and very old school. My dad never used Photoshop. He was never, that's great. I love the things that people are doing on Photoshop, but I think that's a different style of art. My dad was shooting also all these rugged politicians who just had these crazy faces and noses and eyes and and so I shot a lot of bands because that was just part of my environment. I shot a lot of concerts and things like that for friends, and then I would get published. And then I started working in press a little bit. I worked for tattoo magazines. started a travel column for one of them.
Wow.
Which was cool. I got to, I'd go to Portugal and I'd try to find like unusual things to cover. And, like stuff that was kind of off the beaten path. And so, yeah, and then that kind of progressed towards shooting, doing astrophotography. Which is how we met. I was going up with my tripod and my things.
Yes, I know. I was like, who is this person with this big
with all
lens?
this stuff. And so that was, it was lucky that I got to, sometimes I go, to Death Valley. I take, cool pictures. I chase auroras in Iceland. I like to go to Iceland as often as possible, chase the northern lights, eclipses, and tornadoes. So we are in tornado season right now. Before coming here, I was actually, part of the reason I was late, I was discussing with one of my tornado chasing buddies. So we're leaving, I guess, in a week and a half. The season is kicking up. So hopefully lots of very photogenic tornadoes. It's always a little conflicting when you are a storm chaser because obviously some of these tornadoes, I've shot tornadoes that have killed people. And that's kind of a difficult thing to wrestle with, is like, we're not there causing the tornadoes or in any capacity. We're not making it worse for, fire departments to access, victims. We're just there to shoot the phenomena. And a lot of them hopefully are harmless and they just go across some fields and maybe, something like that. But yeah, so shooting storms, that was always also a big passion of mine, was both, I guess it's all in the sky, right? All of this stuff is happening in the sky. Auroras, storms, eclipses, there's so much happening.
I grew up in Texas, so we have a strong space presence there.
Yeah, Texas, is kind of the heartland, right?
Where is the best place to see tornadoes in this country?
Tornado Alley. It's literally, Oklahoma, Kansas. We will generally be watching the weather fronts and radar. We look at radar images and we pick a spot. It can be, last time, pre-COVID, I went to, in one trip, I did like Iowa, Texas Panhandle, Oklahoma, Kansas, and you're just kind of circulating in that area. In recent years, the tornadoes have basically moved eastwards. We don't know why. We don't think it's necessarily correlated with climate change. It's just an effect that's happening and we don't fully know why. But so things are shifting a little eastward, but you do have this unique part of the US where basically you get all the upstream from the Gulf of Mexico and you get all this cold air from the north, and that's why the US is really the only place, it's not the only place in the world where you get tornadoes, but it's the only place where you really have such a concentration of this phenomena. And as you know, you get them in Texas as well.
Exactly, like Finger of God, all that. It's so are you there capturing just like the photos, or are you actually extrapolating data as well to study? Yeah, so
there are people who are there doing research. My friend that I go with, he's from Canada, also a French speaker. He's from Quebec Vortex, and they actually he did a project where he got some data from Reed Timmer, who's a big storm chaser. Reed Timmer, I don't know, sent some rocket or something in a tornado, and he recuperated a lot of the data and is modeling it in a video game kind of format, which is crazy.
That's so interesting.
So there are people who are there with like these mobile radar stations. Very sadly, some years ago, this guy called Tim Samaras, he's basically the kind of like, not father of storm chasing, but he was a big researcher into tornadoes. And him and his son and colleague were killed by this big tornado. I think it was the El Reno tornado, 2013 maybe, I think. And they were really safe people. Wow. They were researchers and, they were chasing to acquire data on tornadoes because, again, there's tons of stuff about tornadoes that we don't, we can't really predict them very long in advance. And so they were killed by this humongous F5 tornado. And everyone, I think, in the community was like, wow, if people like that die, so I don't encourage your listeners to go tornado chasing. I do this with people who are very experienced. We are extremely safe. We are very cautious. When someone says, get back in the car, everyone gets back in the car and leaves. And, because there are people who die every year doing this.
Oh my goodness.
So it's a lot better to chase eclipses and northern lights, a lot safer.
So between tornadoes, eclipses, and northern lights, what's your favorite?
Ooh, what's my favorite? That's a good question. I mean, when you see a solar eclipse in the path of totality, it's awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
You've seen one, right? What was your experience like?
I definitely felt that it was supernatural.
Yeah.
And I was so grateful to be there because, you know, I'm only here for like 6, 7, maybe 8 decades.
Yeah.
But these events are happening and have been happening for centuries.
Yeah.
So to be able to see one to me, it was magical.
Yeah. And I think that's a good way to describe it. Especially when you think about the fact that we live at this moment in time where we have eclipses. The moon's actually drifting a little bit away from the Earth. So we actually, in about 600 million years, we won't have the same kind of eclipses anymore.
Wow.
Yeah. So we'll still have lunar eclipses, but we will not have solar eclipses anymore where they fully cover the sun, because those happen, you know, we are living at a moment where we have this incredible coincidence that the sun is about 400 times further away than the moon, but the moon will appear 400 times larger in the sky. And so there's an exact match where the moon precisely covers the disk, right, on total solar eclipses.
Right.
And in 600 million years, the moon will have drifts about 1.5 inches every year. And so the moon will have drifted further away, and it won't we'll get like Ring of Fire eclipses like the one next year, but we won't get these total anymore where you see the corona of the sun and these tendrils. So, you know, people I think sometimes are quick to say like God or something like you said, it's supernatural, right? But, you know, great, whatever people want to associate that to, as long as I think they enjoy it and that they really feel the magic of it.
Oh my goodness, yes.
Yeah, so I'd say certainly, yeah, solar, I mean, it's hard because Northern Lights, have you ever seen the Northern Lights?
Not yet. I want to. I think I'm gonna like take Gia, like Iceland is a place that I would love to go.
I can give you tips on seeing them.
Please.
Yeah, I'm working on some videos on like, will I tell everyone my secrets?
Oh my God.
But yeah, Iceland's a good place.
Well,
there's
I'm
a couple.
willing to pay for your secrets.
Okay. I see. All right.
You know, information is power. So
yeah, you'll have to have like a deluxe edition of this podcast
where
give me a
subscription.
That's right. Subscription only.
Paywall.
We'll tell you. Yeah, paywall. We'll tell you the secrets. Now, I mean, the secret is that generally going around the equinox. So start of spring, end of March. That tends to be a sweet spot for eclipses because, especially in a place like Iceland, by that point, we're getting enough nighttime and enough daylight, a kind of good balance. Because if you go in the summer, you're not going to see them. It's kind of like you've got the midnight sun at a lot of northern latitudes, so you're not going to be able to see them because it's not dark enough. But at the same time, if you go in wintertime, the weather, do not make the mistake I made. The first time I went to Iceland, I went in December, and the weather was just abysmal. It was just cloudy the whole time. You're not going to see anything. So if the weather's crappy, you don't get to see them. So the equinox, spring equinox, a little bit of the autumn equinox tends to be a good sweet spot to see them. And then you've got locations. There's a location in Sweden and one in Norway. There's Abisko and Tromsø. And those tend to have microclimates, those places, where you will generally get good skies, and so you're likely to see them.
What is it about the equinox that's so magical? Because even the Mayans, when they created Chichen Itza, the Serpent of Light is really incredible. It's like, you can, there's this, are you familiar with the Serpent of Light?
Not too much,
Okay,
no.
so you know the Chichen Itza pyramid? The square one with the top?
Yeah.
So in the equinox, there's a snake head at the very bottom.
Okay.
But only in the equinox do the stairs light up with the sun. And you can see the whole body of the snake.
That's
so it's
really
like
cool.
the stone head, but the body of the snake is this little
awesome.
sun path.
Oh, you'll have to send me that because I'd love to see that.
I've never seen it with my own eyes, but I've seen videos and it's pretty wild.
I mean, the equinox I think is also like, spring is a very magical time for humans, right?
Rebirth.
Like nature comes back to life, and so I guess that it's always, but yeah, we don't know why statistically it just has happened that it could just be that it's a coincidence that every year or so at that specific moment the sun is a little more active and we get more good weather that we can see them, and we've still got enough nighttime. So yeah, equinox is the blessed magical time for kind of chasing, but it is a chase because chasing auroras, it is it's hard. And sometimes The first time I saw them, I took it was on my 30th birthday. I was in Iceland and I took pictures of just the sky over the mountain. And we got back to our hotel and I'm looking at the screen and I'm like, oh my gosh, I saw the auroras. And I didn't even know because our eyes are not as sensitive as camera sensors.
Wow.
And so sometimes you can be looking at them and they just look like wispy clouds. They're not quite as green. They are green, but they're not quite as intensely green as pictures. And that's not even people pushing saturation. That's just that our eyes are not as sensitive, especially at nighttime. You know, the way we have different receptors in our eyes. We have like cones and these little kind of like, we say béton in French, like little sticks. And so I think at nighttime, our eyes are better habituated to see in black and white, basically. We don't see colors as well at nighttime.
So the color spectrum is a little bit more muted.
Yes, and so they won't appear as green or red or purple to you. But we've actually even discovered black auroras. So there's a kind of anti-aurora that can happen, and it looks kind of like a gap in it, and it's a black aurora. We have this other phenomenon called Steve. It's like, I did an episode on it. It was like high-speed thermal velocity emission, and it's a different kind of aurora, and it just looks like this long purple ribbon in the sky. So again, you do kind of need to be chasing these because you need to be in a specific part of the world. Sometimes they appear for 2 minutes and then they're gone. Sometimes it'll kind of dance around like crazy in the sky for 2 hours. It's again another phenomena that we understand how it works and why it happens, but we're not very good at planning them. We're not very good at, there's a lot of mysteries in science that anyone who thinks, I don't want to work in science because everything's already known. No, there's so much to investigate.
Oh my God, every time I hear like something new is discovered, it blows my mind because
right?
It is easy to assume that everything's been discovered.
Yeah, but we don't know what most of the universe is made of. Most of the universe is dark matter and dark energy. We don't really, we call those things dark because they don't interact with light, but we don't know what they are. We know that dark energy is basically an expanding force in the universe that's enlarging the very structure of the universe. We know that dark matter is present in galaxies, a discovery that was mainly made by a female astronomer called Vera Rubin. And, she calculated that there was missing mass in galaxies, right?
Wow.
And, we could tell because of the way the rotation was, these galaxies were rotating too quickly to not be flung apart. And so we figured that there was extra mass in there, but it doesn't interact with light, right? And so we call it dark matter, essentially, because we don't know what it is. We have some ideas, and, we have astroparticle investigation of what those particles are, what is it. But yeah, I mean, the world is, anyone who is curious about nature and what the world and the universe is made of, it's up for the taking, because the more we know, the less we know, right?
That reminds me of what my friend was saying about dinosaurs. He says everything we think about dinosaurs is basically an interpretation of fossils and bones.
Yeah.
Like, we could be completely wrong of what a T-Rex actually looked like.
Yeah, and they've discovered, in fact, that a lot of them had feathers.
Wow.
And they had like these crazy colors. So all those old displays that are in like natural science museums, natural history museum, of these kind of like drab looking dinosaurs, they might have actually been super colorful.
Wow.
So all of that again, and that's not, that's just science works by accruing knowledge bit by bit, right? So we are always kind of refining things and like, oh, actually we were wrong about this thing, or we can refine our knowledge about what dinosaurs looked like. Did they have feathers? Did they have wild colors? And and again, it's dependent on, we need more funding for science in our society in general. The best societies, the most well-functioning societies are highly invested and are invest in science research. And the more of that we do, the more cultured our people are, the more educated, the more they can make good decisions for themselves, even when it comes to like healthcare or eating, like we were talking about.
I'm chuckling because I'm a deeply emotional creature, and to make decisions for me is 9 times out of 10 it's on emotion. But lately, I've been trying to lean on science, right? Where it's like if the math is mathing, right, then I can move forward on a decision, right? And I feel like if I look at the data when I'm making a decision, it's so much easier than when I'm looking at the emotional part. And what's
an example of a decision, for example, for you that you felt like you wanted to look at like data or logical aspects of things?
I would say probably human behavior, right?
Okay,
if you're drawn to somebody, and you're interacting with somebody, how much do you invest in that interaction versus your emotions, or is the interaction reciprocated, right? Where it's like, am I putting more emotion in because I'm interested in developing something here personally? Or is there something in there that's really like processing naturally?
Psychology is a hugely unexplored field. I've kind of read a lot of psychology the past years, which is something I was totally not interested in about before. And I think probably moving to LA, and there's a lot of conversations about mental health.
Yes.
And seeing my own bad habits, for example, with regards to like dating, and then, so like you, I try to now have like, oh, is this good for me? Is this bad for me? Can I take a step back and kind of have introspection and think, is this something do I want a relationship with this person because of something in my past? Or, we're now so much more, I think, familiar with like attachment styles.
Yes.
And knowing like what are our bad habits? How do you cut out your bad habits? And cutting out your bad habits is not just saying like, I'm not going to eat cake today. It's having the introspection to think, why am I eating if I've already eaten?
Right.
What is it that it's giving me that maybe I'm not finding fulfillment in something else in my life? So all of that is hugely scientific, and the investigation of like our kind of our intuition and why do we make certain decisions?
Right, and applying science to dating is something that's very new to me, especially in the psychological aspect, because it's like, normally I would say things like, oh, I have a crush on this person.
Sure.
And recently it's like, oh, my levels of dopamine are higher when I'm with
great.
this person, and my serotonin is through the roof.
Yeah.
So it's like, when I look at it that way, it simplifies, and then of course my anxiety like drops down, and it's easier to make decisions, so. And I do find science to be brilliant in that way, because from the sphere of our own head to everything we see in the sky, it's all science.
Yeah, it's all science. And again, like science, what I was saying about how people view science as this cold thing, science is just a way of investigating things. You could be like, okay, I'm going to do a scientific investigation on why, I don't know, on the way I paint this canvas or something, and what is the best way to apply, painting to this specific, what is the scientific way to get the most perfect red on this dark canvas? Everything that we do by trial and error in some sort of capacity is a scientific investigation, right? What becomes a problem is then when people think that they're doing research by going on Google, right?
Yes.
There's certainly like I do research. There's a movie that I'm going to be a science consultant on, and I'm hoping that I'm going to be doing, I'm going to be reading some papers, but I have formal training in the sciences, right? And I understand that for people who don't, they want to know, how does the vaccine work? Is this vaccine dangerous? Should I be worried? And they go on internet, and they just don't, how can they possibly be expected to understand, like, what is the data, or what is true out there and what isn't? What is a trustworthy person and what isn't? Sure, okay, a person who's a doctor, okay, maybe more trustworthy, but then again, people have sometimes suspicious because they think, oh, they've been paid off by, the pharmaceutical industry or whatever. And it's very hard. I think there's a sociologist I love in France called Gerald Bronner, and he works specifically on people's beliefs and how do beliefs spread online, for example. And he talks about how now when you put in what he calls an unloaded term, like in Google you type vaccine, and unfortunately a lot of the results you're going to get are going to be loaded in the sense that they are, I don't know, some conspiracy theorist or something like that will make a blog, and all that stuff is going to come up first before just like, okay, hey, I'm a vaccine researcher, here's why vaccines are safe. Here's how we developed, the COVID vaccine. Here's what's special about these new vaccines. And so the internet's kind of become, he talks about infobesity and how basically, which is such a great term, right? How can the average person be expected to know how everything in our society, Wi-Fi, 5G, COVID, how does a virus work? How does a vaccine work? The average person cannot possibly be expected to know all these things, and that's fine. But we need to have more like a filter or a way to parse information, and that's so hard for people. How can they know, information, what information is reliable, and when they think, I'm just gonna go online and do some research on something. And again, it's like, you can put out a study. I did an episode recently on explaining to people, like, you can put out a study, and it might be a really rubbish study that has no value, you can say like, well, actually in my study, I figured that chocolate cures cancer. And then you look at the study, and it's like, my study was done on 5 people who are 15 years old, and they didn't get cancer. So clearly, they eat a lot of chocolate, but I mean, I'm exaggerating, but
right, of course.
That is, because there's also a drive to publish in science and people just have to publish, there's a lot of garbage being published.
Yeah.
And so I feel for people out there who just want information, and, how can they possibly be able to sort through like piles and science journalists, some of them, I don't even want to call them science journalists, just journalists who handle science sections will, of course, media nowadays has to do clickbait because they have to make money to survive.
Right.
And, so they're going to push clickbait. And so they're going to push these kind of headlines. Oh, study finds that chocolate cures cancer. And that's how we end up with an entire population that somehow thinks some random fact like that, because there's this trickle of information of like, a bad study was published, a journalist reported on it, and then people, sure, they don't know any better, they just click a headline, and they're like, oh, that's cool, because they're naturally curious. So I don't ever want to fault people for wanting to look up information and wanting to educate themselves, but we need some sort of better way to parse information that comes from the scientific community and have it for the public.
And I feel like that applies to everything, like even every piece of information we need to make decisions for.
Yeah, and those are issues in media in general,
right?
With the change in, obviously, our consumption of media. Like, traditional journalism is super important, and it's dying out because we all don't buy magazines or we don't buy newspapers anymore. And information, we've seen with what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, information is super important, and having information that is as unbiased as possible. How can you do that? We need to have people that that can live, that can live from journalism because it's a job. And that's, I do science journalism and not journalism so much, but science communication. So that's another kind of thing. But yeah, I just made this climate change show, and I'm trying to, again, disseminate information to people in a way that is understandable, and that, especially because we are aimed at children, and not so much children, but teenagers, school children, and how do I make that information accessible to them? That's I think a question that we're all
especially because
wondering.
I definitely feel like the best education is always a balance of art and sciences.
Yeah.
Right, and I feel like without those two,
and that's, part of I gave this talk last year to University of Washington on science communication, and I pointed out, my approach specifically is one of storytelling. Storytelling is a deeply ingrained human thing. We really enjoy storytelling. It's just a deeply psychologically fulfilling thing for us, a story, right? Okay, I can tell you that Urbain Le Verrier discovered Neptune. Cool. But I can also tell you, oh, actually, he discovered it through mathematics because we figured that there was this influence. We were seeing perturbations in the orbit of, another planet, and he crunched some math, and then he sent it to a guy in Germany, and they found it immediately, and it was incredible. And that is much more appealing to people than just, here's a cold, hard scientific fact, right? And so people who are conspiracy theorists and who spread all that nonsense or garbage online, whether they're trying to mislead people or whether they're trying to sell, I don't know, some supplement or something, all those things rely on our love of storytelling. All of this makes a good story. it makes a good story to say that, COVID was invented by some Illuminati or whatever, and then, it was spread by the powers that be, and, and then we created a vaccine. It's a great story. We have movies that do that, right? But we, I think, in science need to become better at exploiting, not even exploiting, it's just a human tendency that we have. We need storytelling to inform also the way that we learn and that we process things, because again, we can't possibly know everything. So our experience relies on, like, you tell me a story about this one time that you took a decision because you saw this thing happening and there was a bad outcome, and so I think, oh, that's interesting. That's a good story. I need to remember that because that's a teachable moment. And so how do we in science create storytelling with our information to engage people?
Yeah, I feel like that's the best way for me to learn, because a lot of subjects in school, especially the science stuff, was so hard to learn at face value, but if I applied stories to it, it was so much easier to understand.
Yeah, and that's,
and so much easier to retain.
Yeah, exactly. And, I don't fault teachers and people, some people aren't very good at teaching. Some people are very good, and then some people just don't have the tools given to them. It seems, I did not go to school in America, but from what I see, teachers here are really, really stretched in terms of resources. So how do we give teachers the resource so that they can teach people in a way that is, I think it's education programs or something haven't been revised, or the way we do education have not been revised in, decades. How do we change that, especially now that kids have social media and they have Instagram and they have TikTok, and so their attention span is probably different, the way they retain information is probably different, what they're interested in is different. How do we adapt to still make education fun, and like you said, like, you just learn better, and we want people to learn stuff.
Absolutely. Speaking of like information in the ether, especially stuff that's like super foo-foo, one of the things like that I find that's so brilliant and fun to subscribe to as a story is Mercury Retrograde.
Sure.
As an astronomer, what do you find interesting about this Mercury Retrograde?
So, I mean, celestial mechanics, the movement of everything around us is awesome, right? Astrometry, I wanted to, in fact, post on Instagram, like, a homework I did in school that was like, calculate the position of this asteroid, right? And it's a lot of calculations, and, we have kind of like a grid across the sky. We know the way things move, and then you will do some like angular calculations to figure out where things are. And I mean, it's hard because astrology, growing up, astrology was just this thing in magazine, and I read it and I was like, oh yeah, I'm totally that sign. That's because I was a kid and I thought it was fun. But as, when I moved to the US and it became this huge thing, and I was very, very anti-astrology, very, like, just it bugged me, honestly. And I've become a little softer towards it in the sense that I try to not alienate people from things that bring them joy. Mm-hmm. And astrology is fairly harmless. I had a guy refuse to go on a date with me years ago that I met in LA because I wouldn't tell him my sign, so that always amused me. And certainly I'd have people, like, the problem is that when people become use it for, I think, antagonizing others, and use it to, like, we were talking about psychology earlier, right? And how little is known. We're just scraping the surface these days. And astrology, I feel, actually my biggest gripe with it isn't necessarily that it uses the planets and that it's inaccurate in a lot of the stuff that it portrays. Like, there's a 13th constellation in the zodiac called Ophiuchus, the Serpent Bear. How cool is that? And, they nixed it. And the constellations don't, the sun doesn't go through every constellation. It's not a month because they're all different sizes. But my biggest gripe is really that reducing human personality, to a fixed thing, when people's personalities are malleable and they change throughout your life. And also, reducing it to, like, you are this thing and you are that thing. I just find that really simplistic and problematic, and a kind of, when I moved here and I would talk to people and I'd have a very enriching conversation and I appreciated getting to know them or their individuality. And then I would share parts of myself, and then they would say, oh yeah, okay, makes sense that you're this. And I just felt very like bummed out and boxed in, like, oh, I guess you've decided to put me in this box, and that's all I can ever be is a this. And that bummed me out, and I at the time removed, I think, any mention of my birthday or things like that from social media. Even today, I don't put it on Instagram, or I put it sometime after, because I don't want people to do that. I find that, but you know, I'm glad that astrology doesn't oppress minorities, doesn't oppress gay people, doesn't oppress women. I think as far as belief systems, it's fairly nice, and I hope that it then leads people to have an interest in astronomy. Way back then, astronomy and astrology were, you know, people, they essentially were the same thing. You'd have a person who was an astronomer and an astrologer, and they would advise the king and queens on like their decision for their kingdom or something based on the movement of, you know, Venus or something. I just doubt, frankly, that a lot of people who are saying that they're astrologers, like I look at the homework I used to do in astrometry and I'm like, those people aren't doing that homework. And if they do, great. But I suspect they're not.
I've had someone refuse to go on a date with me because I told them I was a Gemini, and they boxed me in, and I did not like how that felt.
Yeah,
you
right?
know, it's like people make decisions, like hard decisions, like they make real decisions on your zodiac sign.
Yeah.
But also, I attribute that to what you were talking about, story.
Yeah,
right? People
right.
subscribe to these storytelling power.
Yeah.
Especially when you have like Latin American upbringing, because a lot of us are very superstitious.
Oh yeah?
You know, because you have this...
In what sense? Like...
Well, you have like, you know, for example, specifically Mexican culture, you have the hybrid of like indigenous culture mixed in with European culture.
Right.
Right? So you have a lot of that planetary anchored, like indigenous, like elemental presence of the earth, and then you infuse it with this European
and Catholicism.
And Catholicism
is super superstitious.
It's just like, oh my God, it's like witchcraft almost, right?
Oh yeah, that's true. That I hadn't thought about that mix of kind of like the indigenous, obviously, culture and backbone of the Americas. And then you have Catholicism, which is has a lot of superstitious.
Exactly. And speaking of stories and all that, like. You are also an entertainer.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, you were telling me about, or you were asking me about my career in photography. I was a musician. I mean, I still am a musician for a long time. You know, I had a record out in my band in Europe a long time ago. I grew up I did a lot of theater. I loved the theater. It was so fun. That was kind of my hobby. Music was another thing that I kind of always did. I was a singer and guitarist and bassist. I played in a lot of bands, wrote a lot of songs for other people. And then I grew up with artist parents. So I was lucky that also, I realized recently I've been painting for, somewhere between 20 to 25 years. And I do a lot of art related to astrophysics now. I was lucky some years ago, Hubble featured the Hubble Space Telescope Foundation or group featured some of my art. So I try to communicate science through my art, and astronomy is kind of the meeting point of all those things now, because a lot of the songs I write are, you know, I'll be relating something in my love life or whatever to something astronomy, because that's just how my brain is wired.
Yes.
Just everything I relate to
Love
that. And when it comes to painting and things like that. So I was lucky that coming to LA, part of the reason I moved here was there was such a good mix. You know, JPL and NASA and Caltech are here. And at the same time, you have this thriving music and entertainment industry. And I was just job hunting, and I, you know, couldn't get work, and then signed up with like an acting agency, and I would get work. And so it became this running joke that I'm the only person in this town who's funding their science career through entertainment, which I know is unusual. But you know, I'm really lucky again that I get to do a lot of projects that, it's hard to say that I do some acting work, because really a lot of it is just me. Like, I get hired to, last year I did a virtual reality thing for Oculus, where I got to play guitar for them for their trailer for this new guitar game. Or I play chess, and I got to be in their chess game thing. And so lucky that I get to use all my skills. And part of the reason I came here was to do science shows. That was, you know, following in the footsteps of Carl Sagan and Andrew Ryan and those people, I get to, host and write some science shows. So there were several shows that I did here where, again, trying to make it engaging, trying to make it fun, and trying to show also young girls, like, hey, you can wear makeup and wear pretty dresses and whatever, have a certain look to you and be doing serious things. Like science, which again, not necessarily serious, but you know what I mean. So I've been lucky that working in entertainment, I mostly do cool stuff. I don't think I fit a commercial mold where I could really have a career in that, nor do I want to, because I prefer my science and, my music and painting is part of it, the way I see it. But I've been lucky that the projects I do are cool and completely out there. And LA has so many, really, I have to, give it up to the people in LA who are so creative, people like you that I meet at random places and who are so creative and who have projects and they have podcasts and they have, this is really the epicenter of entertainment and of kind of like stuff happening, which is, I feel lucky and, very lucky that I came here and I get to meet all these amazing people.
Motion capture and Oculus, that's like the perfect hybrid of like science.
Right? Because so much of that, like the entertainment industry relies on tech, the development of, like we were saying, photography, cinema. You're in film, obviously. Like I know very little about film technology. People are always telling me about like, oh, this was shot on this, and I know very little because it's just not my world. But having worked on the other side of the camera, having worked on both sides of the camera, I'm in awe of the stuff you can do today. Like, that movie that just came out, I don't know if you saw it, Everything Everywhere All at Once.
I saw it twice.
Oh, isn't it incredible?
So great.
This thing has a budget of $25 million.
Oh my God.
Or 24. And to think that, I don't even know how they did so much of it.
I don't know either.
It's like the craziest sci-fi psychology meets the multiverse. Someone told me, I haven't seen the latest Doctor Strange, but someone was telling me that it's like what they wanted Doctor Strange to be. And how much does a Marvel cost to make, right?
Exactly.
Probably at least 10 to, 100 times that. And so what people can do now with film.
Oh, absolutely.
Like we're sitting in a room right now, we're just 3 people, you have all this amazing equipment, and you get to broadcast this to people everywhere in the world. So tech is a huge part. And again, that's why it's all linked, right? Creativity, tech, science, all those things kind of come together to create media, to create content, to research things for our curiosity.
I was speaking to this gentleman about a month ago, and he was talking about this whole thing that he does to help people, but the anchor of his work was frequencies.
Okay.
And how everything that we do is all through light and sound.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where music,
Yeah.
photos, it's all light and sound.
Right. Yeah.
And that's the science of media.
Yeah.
Where it's light and
light
sound.
and sound and color and
Exactly.
Yeah, which is at the base of astronomy. Astronomy is color. Astronomy is light. I wanted to bring you. I'll show it to you another time. I have a little spectroscope. Spectroscope is basically a tool we have installed on a lot of research telescopes that decomposes light. And that's kind of how we know everything in the universe is we have essentially looked at stars with a spectroscope. And that image of Pink Floyd, the rainbow being split, the light being split into a rainbow. Within that rainbow, you actually have these lines basically that are called Frownhofer Lines. And those basically where they are will tell us what something is made of or what the light has gone through. Say it's gone through like gas, a cloud of molecular gas. And so we know everything in the universe because we have decomposed light and looked at it, right? Because we're not going to other planets and other solar systems. We can do all this stuff from here, and essentially everything we know almost in the universe is a process of light investigation.
So when someone says, I'm manifesting the universe to bring me what I want, like a lot of life is just energy.
Yeah, I'm loath to go into esoteric.
Right, of course.
I'm always careful to be like, well, in the same way what we were saying about the eclipses, right?
Right.
Oh, if some people want to assign religious meaning to it, cool. But largely it's like, it's a coincidence. And like, I would tell you I'm agnostic because I feel that's the scientifically honest thing to do. I don't necessarily believe that there's a big bearded man in the sky. I find that a little problematic for different reasons. But I respect what people want to believe in, again, as long as I think they don't use it. I think it's great to have faith in certain things. Like you were saying, people will say like, oh, I'm manifesting this. Of course, having a positive psychological outlook will help you get what you want.
Right.
I'm like, I think 2022 is going to be a great year for me for a variety of reasons. And so far, it's been a great year. But that's also because I'm looking at things in a positive way because of that. So it's kind of self-reinforcing.
Absolutely.
So manifestation works in the sense of just having the psychology to train your brain against negativity bias. That's something I learned through psychology. We have a negativity bias where we kind of, anxiety, etc., stems from just a very primitive thing of we want to stay alive. And the way to do that is to get scared when you see something that looks like that poison berry you ate once, right?
Or the that saber-toothed tiger coming at you.
Exactly. And so the way we do that is that we have strong negativity biases that then lead to anxiety, to panic attacks, to things like that, because we don't want to repeat that experience. So you can, I was doing this experiment on like training my brain to have a positivity bias. And really when you tell yourself you're manifesting something, or 2022 is going to be a great year for me. Or you read your horoscope and your horoscope says your finances are going to improve. Great. What you're doing is just training yourself to have a positivity bias towards things. And yeah, that will notably improve often your experience of life. But
so
it just becomes problematic when then people are like, oh, it's scientific. And it's like, I'm kind of cautious about that.
But even the self-talk can have scientific applications to your brain.
Yeah.
That is amazing to me.
Yeah. And isn't it incredible that it's like you can consciously, it's like your brain is figuring itself out. There was a thing I read last year and it was like, if you're feeling bummed out or depressed, give yourself a lot of compliments throughout the day, even on something really simple like, oh, my house is really clean. Look at what a great job I did. And you know what? That really helps you when you're going through a breakup or you're going through something unpleasant where you're a lot of people do a lot of negative self-talk, I think in this town especially, because we're all hustling and we're all like, oh my God, if I haven't put out 25 films by the age of 50, I'm nothing.
It's like, I think if you're going to be a therapist, this is the best place to work.
Oh yeah, exactly, yeah. So, I think being kinder to ourselves and the way we talk to ourselves, has a massive impact on your mental health and on the way you're going to experience the world, which is important. And similarly, I don't like the aspect of science. There are some people that I'm not going to give names, but there are people out there in science communication who are very visible and very prominent who have kind of made it their business to basically tell other people that they're stupid. It's a funny shtick, and I get it. Like, everyone else is just so dumb, and all these anti-vaxxers, and fair enough, I think it too sometimes, but you really have to resist that impulse, I think, to call other people stupid and to be like, lord over them with your knowledge, because that's not what we're here for. We're here to share knowledge, and we're here to inspire people, and not to, make them feel bad about the things they don't know.
Wow, that's well put, because I definitely feel that shaming and bullying is, in any direction, is horrible. And it's like just regressing humanity in a collective way.
Yeah, it's not positive. Mm-hmm. And I know it's frustrating for people who are, I say this, I'm privileged, I do astrophysics communication. There are people who are doing medical communication, and we're doing that in the times of COVID. And I got messages in 2020 of people who were like, hey, I heard that if I gargle turmeric, I'm not going to get COVID. It stretches my patience some days. But I'm also like, I'm flattered that you ask me things, and I feel an immense weight of your trust in what I know. And so I want to honor that by trying to give you factual information and not being like, you dummy, how could you not know this? And yeah, and so I hope that we are kind of turning a page on also that style of communication.
Absolutely.
Because yeah, like you said, it feels like bullying and it feels unpleasant, and you don't learn things that way.
When I think of you, I definitely feel like you're one of these humans that is multifaceted. Your
Thank you.
science, your arts, you create music, you paint, and I feel like this is a conversation that I really appreciate because it definitely feels that I want to crystallize a different sort of experience in my day.
Yeah.
Where it's like, hey, I constantly focus on the art of things, but I rarely look at the science of things.
Yeah.
And only recently have I started to like veer back because I definitely feel off balance where I'm like super artistic, but scientifically I'm like, hey, if I put more weight, I could just bring myself back and feel more balanced.
But you have all the, I mean, like, you know all this tech, and so that, to me, that is scientific in its approach to things, right? You're not just like, let me record you in the woods, you know, and like doing something like that. And so it's cool that you also, you're like, okay, sure, you're super creative, but at the basis of it, you also are like, okay, here's how I do things. Like, you've readjusted the camera several times. You know, you tested that the mic worked, and that is a science in itself. You've like made sure that you want your result to be X, Y, and Z, and so in order to reach that, you're doing everything, you know, that leads up to that. So I think, and just like you said, with your like mental reflections on certain things, you also are turning to a scientific process of like, let me take a step back and have some introspection on the way that I make a decision, for example. And that's super, like I said, science is in everything.
Yes.
You know, and it's not limited to people who are, oh, I'm a scientist and, you know, I'm doing research. Like, okay, that's cool, and you're a researcher, but I feel that everyone benefits from having a scientific approach to things.
And what's been the most rewarding part for you in your experience as a person of science?
Yeah. Most rewarding. So, you know, it's funny right now working at, I work some days at Griffith Observatory. I get to talk to people about, I do like to talk about sunspots. I will talk to people. I will talk their ear off about sunspots, and just seeing people, connecting with people who have not necessarily been connected to. There was a person on I have a TikTok channel, on you know, YouTube, TikTok, etc., where I decided, hey, I do all these shows, why not make my own as well where I can decide the content? And so I did an astrophysics channel, and sometimes someone will leave me a comment like, I have ADHD. I have a really hard time, you know, parsing information or listening to a video for more than a minute, and your video, you know, really spoke to me, or I was able to listen the whole way through and understand it. Or when I talk to people at Griffith or elsewhere that have just not been reached to. You know, young girls who are like, oh, I just, you know, I didn't think science was cool, and I didn't see any girls doing science. And that is super rewarding. When I get someone to just care and share, it's a really human thing. You know, you're just sharing something that like, oh my God, sunspots are amazing, and here's why. And someone, you know, latches onto that and is like, you know, a lot of people come up at Griffith and they look at the celostat, the solar, we have projection of through the solar telescope, and they're kind of like, they're just glancing at it and they don't really know what it is. And then I'm like, hey, do you want to see something amazing? Here's a sunspot. Here's why it's cool. Here's the size of the Earth in comparison. And they just kind of light up because they didn't have access to that information before, and they just thought it was some display of the sun or something. And now I've given them a personal connection to make something their own. Maybe they're going to go home and they're going to Google sunspots. Maybe in a year's time, they're going to see some flyer for an astronomical society doing a viewing of sunspots, and they're going to want to go to that, and they're going to meet someone cool. And so, you know, you're giving them tools to have a deeper appreciation of the natural world around them.
Oh my
and
God,
I think that's what's
so
super rewarding.
awesome. I'd like to do like a rapid fire round before we close.
Okay,
all right.
yeah. Let's do it.
So before we close, a little rapid
Yes.
fire. Okay, favorite planet?
Neptune, because it was discovered by the person who was the director of the Paris Observatory where I studied.
Wow.
So Neptune,
amazing.
Neptune all the way.
Nice. Favorite constellation?
Ooh, Cygnus, the swan.
Ooh, I've never seen
I think
that
it
one.
flies south in the summer, so it's kind of like the head of the swan is pointing southward, at least in France. I'd need to check. Orientation should be the same here, but I like Cygnus. It's a good constellation.
Sunrise or sunset?
I'm not usually up at sunrise, so I'm going to say sunset.
Solar or lunar eclipse?
Ooh, solar.
Nice.
Solar.
Photography, digital or film?
Ooh. Oh, man. I don't... I started shooting in film when I was little, but I'm always curious about you guys's approach, because I always hear you film people, you're always like, oh, film is so much better, and the grain, but I do kind of see it sometimes in the image. So film, I guess, yeah.
Well, one of the things that I love about what you were saying about your dad is that he was, I'm going to go out and say that he was a film purist, right? Where
Yeah, I guess he is a film purist.
Right,
he shoots digital now,
right.
But in a way, though, digital is access to the masses, and so I appreciate that digital has this reach that we can... does film have a reach as well, or?
Maybe. I think like...
It's kind of like vinyl versus like
I
analog
think maybe in
versus
the dark
digital.
room you can pull, you can play with the light a little bit.
Yeah.
But do you feel that digital photography can enhance the astronomical experience when you're like looking at the sky?
Oh, for sure, yeah. The kind of telescopes, I'm going to get a telescope at the end of the year, like a really proper one, and the kind of stuff that they make nowadays. Yeah, and that makes it accessible to a lot of people, is to have digital photography that they can just shoot through this telescope. And I don't think you can really do that with film.
Right.
So in a way, I'd say probably digital, because... Yeah.
Right, because I've seen some of these astro photos of like planets and that people do on YouTube, and they're actually like 200 photos like compiled into one.
Yeah, so they stack them.
Yeah,
There's ways of processing stuff, and I learned how to do it in school. And I got to do an internship at the Observatoire de Haute-Provence, which is where actually the first exoplanet around a main sequence star was discovered. And so we learned how to like stack all these pictures of nebulas, and you colorize them. Hubble shoots in black and white. A lot of people don't know the Hubble Space Telescope, the images are black and white originally. And they're all colored for different elements and things like that. I guess Hubble shoots in digital. So maybe digital, digital.
Nice. Favorite space movie?
Probably Contact, because it's about radio astronomy, and not a lot of people pay attention to radio astronomy. Like, sure, it's about aliens and all that, and it's written by Carl Sagan, so how can we say anything else than Contact?
I love that movie. That movie's so good.
So good.
I have a ham radio somewhere around here.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it's
nice.
over there.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I love radio.
And radio astronomy is super useful. We make a lot of discoveries, and radio astronomy is something we can do without, we have to send a lot of telescopes out sometimes because our atmosphere blocks parts of the spectrum. I think radio astronomy we can do, and if you go to New Mexico, you can visit, the Very Large Array where part of Contact was filmed, and they're doing radio astronomy. And radio astronomy is super exciting.
Oh my God, I'm gonna have to do more research on that for sure. Next question. If you had a full tank of gas, your camera, and you were going to shoot some stars, where would you go? If you were in LA, where would you go to? Like, obviously...
How much gas do we have here?
Full tank, round trip.
Man, because I don't drive, I couldn't tell you exactly. Death Valley, great skies in Death Valley. I love Death Valley. That was when I first visited LA more than 10 years ago, number one thing I wanted to do was go to Death Valley, see the skies there, see the salt flats. Otherwise, I was just telling you about the VLA. The best sky I ever saw was outside the Very Large Array in New Mexico. Zion, amazing skies. People should look up dark skies because there are specific places, there are protected skies, and that's something that the astronomy community is working towards, getting cities to implement, just having covers over your streetlights. That means that then, we can see the actual Milky Way and things like that. We're so disconnected because we have so much light pollution. So ultimately, if you have a full tank of gas, go somewhere where there's as little light pollution as possible, and you can generally find those by looking up dark skies or protected skies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, best sky I ever saw was in Montana.
Oh, wow,
yeah,
cool.
my parents, they have a place out there, and it was still 10 o'clock at night, and there was still light outside.
Oh, cool.
But at 2 in the morning, I looked up and...
Just, right? And isn't it incredible when you can see the Milky Way?
Yeah, it's so brilliant, and just... I mean, it really makes me think of what the astronomers in Chichen Itza and in Cairo, when they were building pyramids, like what did these astronomers know? And did we inherit any of that knowledge?
I mean, we did. You know, lots of stuff was passed on. There's actually an eclipse going through Egypt in 2027, I believe, 2028 or 20. I think it's 2027. I'm very excited. I think it goes through like the Valley of the Kings and potentially over the pyramids. I will be there. I will be in Egypt. Hopefully nothing happens to me before 2027. And yeah, that's kind of the convergence, right, of like all these myths in ancient Egypt about, you know, and what did those people think at the time? They had so much myth associated to eclipses. So getting to see that from Egypt.
Right, especially when you think about these eclipses have been happening way before organized religion.
Yeah, right.
And will continue to happen.
Man, it must have been a trip to be like a prehistoric person, and you just suddenly it's sunset in the middle of the day, and you're like, oh my gosh. Yeah, great power. If you could go back in time, go back to a time, I don't know though, as a woman, I would have probably been dubbed a witch, I guess, science witch. Lots of scientists were probably seen as wizards and witches. And science is a kind of magic, so I feel like it kind of it tracks.
It's like, I think that was that movie Thor, where he's like, I come from a place where magic and science is the same.
Oh, does he say that?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So,
that's really cool. I didn't know that he said that.
And I feel like brujas is like always like, you know, I think the real like definition is they're always trying to improve life.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I could definitely see why you would say that.
Yeah. No, hey, I gotta look up that quote. That sounds like words to live by.
Back to the signs. I saw this meme that said, "What's your sign?" and the reply said, "Sign of God."
I didn't know that one. Usually it's like T-Rex. I like to reply that to people sometimes just to mess with them, like asparagus. And they're like, there's no asparagus. Like, that's not a real sign. None of them are real. Again, like I said, I joke. I've become a lot softer, and I try to respect people's beliefs as long as they don't lie and say that they've done astrometry to find the positions of planets.
And final question. If you are going to bed at night and you're putting on a movie, do you put on a French movie or American movie, or what's your favorite genre? Horror movie, or what's it like?
Oh man, let me betray my nation by saying that for a long time I didn't like French movies, French film, because I just thought a lot of it was like so depressing. A lot of our movies, and I get it, you know, like that show Emily in Paris makes a joke about that, and is like, yeah, but because our movies are real. Because we don't, you know, we're not like, yay, everything's happy, it's perfect. But I pretty much only watch sci-fi. And I know that people are always frustrated because they're like, oh, you should watch this thing. And I'm like, is it sci-fi? It's just, I only have so many hours in the day. And so, you know, I will put on generally sci-fi, which the US we have some good sci-fi in France. There was a good show on maybe Netflix called Ad Vitam. Mm-hmm. It was about a society that discovers the tech to basically become immortal. That was a good one. And recently, Raised by Wolves, really cool show that involves an exoplanet.
Love it.
A planet, another. Did you watch it?
I have like 2 episodes left on season 2.
Oh, so good.
Love that show.
Kind of twisted.
Yes.
Like the show actually, no spoilers, but the show ends on a character saying, "What the fuck?" The second season, and you're like, yeah, but that's what sci-fi is about, right?
I know, it's like, when I hear that movie and that show, I'm like, they had F-bombs in the future?
Oh, yeah, no. But, it's funny because they have the planet that it's happening on is Kepler-22b, which somehow has turned up in a bunch of sci-fis. It is a real planet, we think. Not we think, it's one of the exoplanets we found. I don't know that we know as much about it as like the show has obviously built on this idea of it being an Earth-like planet or something. But it's kind of cool to see what all the sci-fis are doing with like the knowledge of suddenly we know of 5,000 exoplanets, planets in other solar systems.
Oh my goodness.
So maybe I'll say like French sci-fi what I'll put on to not betray my country.
Well, final question. This is like the ultimate question.
Yeah.
If you could take a one-way trip into space and never come back, would you go?
Yes, but it depends on what age you ask me.
Ooh.
So my dream sure is to go into space. I would say that's my biggest wish. But, I also like Earth is beautiful and magical, and I think you suddenly realize the loneliness that is space. It's kind of a big empty void. I mean, it's not, there's a lot of stuff, but distances are very far apart. You want to go to the closest star, you're a long ways away. So I think the magic of being human and of interacting with other people and having sunrises, sunsets, all these things you've asked me about, and art and science and sci-fi, and yeah, so I would like to go to space. I would love to. One-way trip, sure, maybe if I'm 60, 70. And I've exploited enough time on this planet.
That is the best closing answer I've ever heard on this show.
Cool, I'm
Merci
glad.
beaucoup.
Merci à toi.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Congratulations on being such a wonderful human.
Oh, thank you. And you. And thank you so much for inviting me and having a wonderful discussion with me about science. And I appreciate people being, and you're so knowledgeable about everything too. So it's nice to have a kind of back and forth on topics that are cool and awesome to talk about.
Thank you.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you for listening to Stebner Show.